She stood at the edge of the firing range, quiet, still, almost invisible, and that was exactly how she liked it. The Carolina sun burned above Fort Bragg, painting the earth in a hard light that made every shadow sharp. The smell of gun oil and spent brass clung to the air, that familiar perfume of soldiers who measured themselves in precision and recoil. Her name, at least, the one written on the paperwork, was Sarah Chun. No insignia, no visible rank, just jeans, a jacket, and a calm so steady it felt like defiance. Most people would have mistaken her for a civilian observer, maybe a new contractor. That's exactly what they did. From Lane 7 came the voices, loud, confident, and careless. The kind of confidence that comes not from mastery, but from the absence of fear. Lieutenant Brandon Hayes stood in the center of it, telling some story about his time overseas, how he'd saved his unit with a lucky shot. Every laugh that followed inflated him a little more. He didn't see her at first, few like him ever did. But Webb did. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, older, quieter, the kind of soldier who'd seen too much to find arrogance amusing anymore. He watched from lane 12, adjusting his spotting scope, reading people the way others read the wind. Something about the woman by the range desk caught his attention. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't trying to look confident. She was just present. Completely, silently present. The specialist at the desk was already confused. Her paperwork was unlike anything he'd processed. No unit patch, no visible designation, just a clearance code that looked like something from a classified rotation. "Where are you assigned?" he asked cautiously. "The code has my authorization," she replied, voice level, polite but final. Before the specialist could process that, Hayes strutted over, his boots loud against the concrete. He had the easy arrogance of someone who'd never been humbled in public, not yet. "Ma'am," he started, smiling like he was doing her a favor, "this course is for advanced operators. Long-range marksmanship, 800 meters, elevation adjustment, wind correction. You sure you're in the right place?" Sarah met his eyes. "Yes." Hayes glanced at his team, Miller, Rodriguez, Jackson, all standing behind him like satellites. "The beginner course is down the road," he added with a grin. "They do orientations on Thursdays." The specialist tried to interrupt. "Sir, her code checks out." But Hayes waved him off. "Look, it's not a big deal. These things happen. Tell you what, ma'am, why don't you come back when you've got proper orders and credentials? Save everyone the embarrassment." There was no anger in her, no visible reaction, just a silence that made everyone else start to feel small. "I'll wait," she said quietly, "while you verify the authorization code." The words were calm, but they landed like a shot. Hayes turned away, laughing to his team. "This should be good. Maybe we'll learn something about participation trophies today." He didn't see Webb lower his rifle and watch with quiet unease. He'd seen that kind of man before, the kind who measured worth by noise. When the system finally cleared the code, the specialist's voice cracked. "Sir, the authorization checks out. Lane 3 is assigned." Hayes grinned, spreading his arms in mock welcome. "Well then, class, looks like we've got ourselves a guest. Everyone make her feel very welcome." They laughed. She didn't. Sarah walked to lane 3 with the same deliberate calm, unpacking her rifle with the precision of ritual. No wasted motion. No hesitation. Webb's instincts stirred. That kind of quiet didn't come from uncertainty. It came from experience. The kind learned under pressure, not at a training range but somewhere darker. The range officer's whistle cut through the air. Target set. Wind from the southeast, 8 knots. Standard conditions. Hayes was first to fire, narrating his every move as though teaching a class. Wind 8 knots. Elevation set for 800 meters, sending it. He fired 3 clean shots, hit close enough to call it a success. His team clapped him on the back. Sarah didn't move. She waited, breath slow. When her turn came, she lowered herself into position with the kind of grace only repetition breeds. She exhaled, squeezed the trigger. "Miss," the spotter called. Hayes laughed. "Might want to aim at the target," he shouted. "It helps." She made a tiny adjustment, fired again, another miss. By the 5th shot, the laughter grew louder. By the 20th, even the soldiers from other lanes had started watching. It became a show, Hayes the performer, his audience growing with every missed shot. But Webb saw something they didn't. Her breathing never changed, her form never faltered, her hands were steady, too steady. Something didn't add up. By shot 40, Hayes was practically performing stand-up. "Maybe someone call her boyfriend. We're wasting ammo here." The others laughed, but not as freely now. Something about the way she ignored him made it worse. Her silence was unsettling, not submission, not defeat. Focus. 67 shots later, she stopped, set the rifle down gently. Then she turned to the crowd, eyes calm. "The rifle 0 is off by 2.3 milliradians at this elevation," she said evenly. "I've corrected it." A pause. "Who'd like to try the target now?" The laughter died instantly. Hayes couldn't resist. "Oh, sweetheart, I'll show you how it's done." He took her rifle, exaggerated every step of his setup, then fired. Miss. Another. Another. He scowled, blaming the scope. Equipment malfunction. "May I?" she asked. He stepped aside. She took position, exhaled once, and fired 5 times in perfect rhythm. 5 centermass hits, dead center. Even the spotter's voice shook. All bulls a grouping, 800 meters. The silence was total. Webb leaned into his scope. What he saw made his pulse slow. The 5 holes were close enough to be covered by a playing card. Hayes went pale. "Let me see that target," he stammered. Sarah didn't answer. She turned toward the 1,000-meter mark, adjusted and fired 3 times. 3 clean impacts, center mass. The spotter blinked, speechless. "That's not possible with iron sights." "These aren't iron sights," she said softly, engaging the safety. And that was when the boots came. A line of them, command presence in motion. General Wardell. He stopped at lane 3, studying the scene with a calm that chilled the air. "Captain," he said quietly, "may I ask your name?" The word captain hit the crowd like a shockwave. She turned, meeting his eyes. "Captain Sarah Chun, sir." The laughter that had filled the range hours ago now existed only as memory, sour and heavy. "Your unit?" the general asked. "JSOC, sir. Currently on NMCG rotation." Even Webb swallowed. He knew those letters: Joint Special Operations Command, Naval Mountain Combat Group. That wasn't a unit. That was a myth in motion. Wardell nodded slowly, already piecing it together. "Your operational call sign, Captain." She hesitated only a second. "Artemis 6. The name rippled through the crowd like thunder. Webb whispered it under his breath. Artemis 6. A legend, a sniper whose record was whispered about but rarely confirmed. 89 confirmed kills, longest shot in modern military history. Hayes stood frozen, color drained from his face. Wardell turned toward him with surgical calm. "Lieutenant, do you know who Artemis 6 is?" Hayes opened his mouth. "No, sir, I—" Wardell didn't wait for the answer. He gestured toward Sarah. "She's the reason half of your team ever made it out of Helmand alive, Lieutenant. She's the operator who taught the people who trained you." The words hung there like judgment. Sarah said nothing. She didn't need to. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to Wardell, it was to Hayes. "The issue isn't that you didn't know who I was," she said quietly. "It's that you treated someone you thought was a civilian woman this way at all." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man's pride. She gathered her gear, methodical, silent. "My evaluation of your unit is complete," she said to Wardell. "Thank you for your time." Then she walked away, the crowd parting like a tide. No victory, no anger, just calm, finality, and something far heavier than revenge. Webb watched her go, the truth settling in his gut like lead. It wasn't just about the shots. It never had been. It was about what happens when arrogance meets discipline and loses. The old lesson came back to him, unbidden. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, it simply acts. He whispered it to himself as the gate closed behind her, and the echo of her footsteps faded into the still Carolina air. No one spoke for nearly a full minute after she left the range. The sound of her footsteps still echoed faintly across the concrete, fading into memory and shame. Lieutenant Brandon Hayes stood frozen, mouth slightly open, as if the world had stopped mid-motion. Around him, the men who had cheered his jokes just hours earlier now refused to meet his eyes. Staff Sergeant Webb lowered his rifle. He didn't want to be here anymore, but he couldn't look away. He'd seen pride before. He'd seen arrogance. But he had never seen a man collapse so completely under the weight of his own words. When the general turned toward Hayes, the silence turned heavy. "Lieutenant," General Wardell said, voice calm but cold, "you will not contact Captain Chun. You will not explain. You will not attempt damage control. You will report to my office at 1400 hours with your team. Do I make myself clear?" Hayes managed a stiff nod. His throat was dry. Wardell looked to the range safety officer. "I want every second of footage from this morning preserved and copied. Full incident report by noon." "Yes, sir." "Everyone else," Wardell said, scanning the gathered soldiers, dismissed. "If you witnessed what occurred, you'll be contacted for a statement." The crowd scattered quickly. No one wanted to linger near the wreckage. Webb stayed, knowing his day had only just begun. Wardell's eyes met his. "Staff Sergeant, I'll need your statement, every detail, every quote you remember." "Yes, sir." "And Webb," the general added quietly, "I saw your expression earlier. You knew something was wrong. You didn't stop it." "Yes, sir," Webb said, shame tightening in his chest. "I should have." Wardell studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "Then tell the truth in your report. That will matter more than any excuse." When the general walked off, the weight of what had happened seemed to settle on the concrete itself. Hayes still hadn't moved. His team, Miller, Rodriguez, Jackson, stood a few feet away, not speaking. They looked like men waiting for a verdict that hadn't yet been read. Webb walked past them toward the gate. As he did, Miller spoke, voice low, almost pleading. "Staff Sergeant, what do we do?" Webb didn't stop walking. "Tell the truth," he said. "It's all that's left." The next morning, word had spread like fire through the base. Everyone had heard some version of the story. A mysterious woman humiliating a range instructor. The name Artemis 6 whispered like folklore. By midday, the reality had caught up with the rumors. General Wardell had confirmed the incident, and an official review was underway. Colonel Patricia Morrison was called back from an off-base logistics conference, the message waiting for her read. JSOC operator publicly harassed during evaluation. Incident captured on video. Return to base immediately. She didn't finish her coffee. 2 hours later, she was in her office at Fort Bragg, the room dim except for the glow of a tablet on her desk. The video was queued up, time-stamped, ready. She hit play. The laughter filled the room, casual, cruel, oblivious. Hayes's voice narrated his own downfall. By the 5th minute, Morrison's expression hardened. By the 20th, her pen had already scratched notes in the margins of a blank report. By the end, she had seen enough to end a career. General Wardell entered quietly, cap under his arm. "You've seen it." "I have," she said. "It's worse than the report suggested." Wardell nodded grimly. JSOC's already been notified. Captain Chun submitted her preliminary evaluation. She's recommended against integration, citing systemic cultural failure. Morrison looked up sharply. She's not wrong. The JAG officer, Captain Shaw, sat across from her, scrolling through a tablet. There are 23 witness statements, all consistent. This isn't just one bad moment, ma'am. It's a culture problem. Morrison set her pen down. Then we'll treat it as such. By 1600 hours, Hayes and his team were seated in front of Morrison's desk. Webb stood to the side, witness, not accused. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of sweat and dread. Morrison's voice was measured, controlled. "I've reviewed the footage," she began. "I've read 15 witness statements. I've read Captain Chun's preliminary evaluation." She let the silence build weight before continuing. What occurred this morning was not a joke that went too far. It was not a misunderstanding. It was harassment, systematic, sustained, and in full view of your peers. She pressed a button on her tablet. The screen behind her came alive with the first clip. Hayes's voice filled the room. Maybe she should try the beginner course. The clip ended, the next began. "Call her boyfriend. This is just sad to watch." Then the third, the hollow apology after learning who Chun was. "Ma'am, I would never have spoken that way if I'd known who you were." Morrison paused the playback. The silence that followed was suffocating. "Lieutenant Hayes," she said softly, "explain to me what you were thinking." Hayes swallowed hard. "Ma'am, I thought she was a civilian who'd gotten confused about which course she was in. I was trying to save her the embarrassment." Morrison's voice cut like a blade. "Yes, ma'am." "That's not what I saw," she said. "Try again." Hayes looked down. His hands were shaking. "Because I didn't think she belonged there," he said finally. "Because she didn't look like she did. Because she was a woman." The truth landed heavier than any bullet. Morrison's gaze was steady, and the performance, the laughter, the comments. He hesitated, then broke. "I was showing off. I wanted to look good in front of my team." She leaned forward. "And to do that, you decided to humiliate a stranger." Hayes couldn't speak. Morrison turned to Miller. "Sergeant, you participated." Miller straightened, jaw tight. "Ma'am, I followed Lieutenant Hayes's lead. I thought it was just jokes at first. Then it went too far. I knew it was wrong." "And you stopped it?" "No, ma'am." Rodriguez and Jackson's answers were the same. Excuses wrapped in regret. When she finally turned to Webb, her tone softened slightly. "Staff Sergeant, you were there but not part of it. Tell me what you saw." Webb took a breath. "Ma'am, I observed deliberate harassment over 90 minutes, approximately 30 separate comments from Lieutenant Hayes, increasingly personal. The others joined in. I considered intervening but didn't. That was my failure." Morrison wrote something down. "And why didn't you?" "Because she didn't seem affected. Because I thought maybe she could handle it. I was wrong." That admission, quiet, honest, hung in the air longer than any of the others. When he finished, Morrison leaned back. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. That's the first truthful statement I've heard all afternoon." She turned to Hayes again. "Lieutenant, Captain Chun's evaluation has been submitted and accepted. Your unit's JSOC integration is denied. Effective immediately, you are relieved of instructor duties. You will report to administrative assignment until further notice. Your promotion eligibility is suspended pending investigation." Each word hit like a hammer. Hayes opened his mouth, but Morrison cut him off. "No, you don't get to fix this. You had your chance this morning." She looked at each man in turn. "You humiliated a legend, but worse, you revealed who you truly were when you thought no one was watching." Rodriguez shifted in his seat, his face pale. Miller looked like he wanted to disappear. Morrison stood. The authority in her posture filled the room. "Gentlemen, this is more than a disciplinary issue. This is a mirror. What you saw in that reflection today should disturb you." She let that sink in. "Dismissed," she said finally. Webb stayed behind as the others filed out. Morrison regarded him quietly. "You'll lead the new marksmanship program," she said. "We need professionalism, not performance. Integrity, not intimidation. Can you do that?" Webb nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," she said, "because after what happened here, you'll be rebuilding trust from ashes." When he left the room, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The air outside was cool now, heavy with that late Carolina dusk that made everything look softer except the guilt. He walked past the empty range, now closed off with red tape. The targets still stood in the distance, some clean, some shredded with holes. He could still hear her voice, calm and level. "The issue isn't that you didn't know who I was. It's that you treated someone you thought was a civilian that way at all." He'd repeated those words to himself all day, and they still cut deeper each time. At his car, Webb stopped, glancing back once more toward Lane 3. The spot where she had stood was empty now, but somehow it felt occupied, like her presence had imprinted itself into the concrete. He wondered where she was now, probably already gone. JSOC operators didn't linger. He thought of the men she'd trained, the legends she'd mentored, the unseen wars she'd shaped. And then, almost against his will, he whispered, "Who's hunting who now?" Because in a single morning, she dismantled an entire culture of arrogance, without firing a shot that wasn't aimed at a target. Sometimes, the most devastating marksmanship wasn't about distance or precision. It was about truth. And truth, he realized, always hits center mass. Colonel Patricia Morrison didn't sleep that night. She sat alone in her office, the glow of her tablet the only light in the room. Outside, Fort Bragg slept or pretended to. Inside these walls, reputations were unraveling, one document at a time. The video played again, though she didn't need to see it anymore. She knew every frame, every cruel laugh, every empty word that followed. Her stylus hovered over the notes section of her report. She'd written one line and underlined it twice. Culture failure, not incident. It wasn't about Hayes anymore. It was about everything that had let him happen. By 700 hours, her inbox was full. JSOC requests, base inquiries, and one encrypted message marked priority personal. It was from General Wardell. "Colonel, JSOC Command requests a full account by 900. Captain Chun's report already circulating. She's flagged systemic leadership issues. Prepare for oversight." Morrison closed the message, leaned back and exhaled. Systemic leadership issues. They made it sound so academic, so sterile. But what she saw on that video wasn't sterile. It was human, painfully human. She looked at the still frame of Hayes' mid-laugh. He wasn't a villain, just a soldier who'd confused cruelty for confidence and performance for power. But the system had let him. She stood and walked to the window, sunlight breaking through blinds in narrow bands. The base was waking. Trucks moved, soldiers ran, bugles cried out. Routine carried on, oblivious. That was the problem with institutions. They kept marching, even when they stepped over the fallen. At 900, her office filled. General Wardell arrived first, his face drawn tight. Behind him, Captain Dennis Shaw from JAG and Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez from the Inspector General's office. Morrison motioned them to sit. "Let's not waste time," she said. "We all know why we're here." Wardell nodded. "JSOC wants the full truth. Every document, every complaint, every oversight. They're not treating this as one lieutenant's mistake. They're treating it as a structural problem." Martinez opened her tablet. "Sir, ma'am, I've already begun cross-referencing prior informal complaints in the training division. 18 over the past 3 years. 14 involved inappropriate comments toward female personnel. 3 cited instructors, creating hostile environments. None escalated beyond counseling." "Names?" Morrison asked. "Lieutenant Hayes appears in 3. 2 of them from women who left the base within months." Wardell's expression darkened, and no one thought that was a pattern. They did, Martinez said quietly. But the system wasn't designed to connect the dots. Each complaint handled at company level. No centralized tracking. Morrison clenched her jaw. Then we'll redesign it. At 1600 hours the same day, she faced Hayes again. He sat alone now, no team to hide behind. His uniform was crisp, but his posture had collapsed. He looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in 24 hours. "Lieutenant," Morrison began, voice quieter now, less fire, more frost. "The investigation confirms you've had prior complaints, informal but consistent." Hayes nodded, eyes on the floor. "Ma'am, those were misunderstandings. I completed counseling." "And learned nothing," she replied. "You treated professionalism like a formality. You thought the paperwork was punishment. It was supposed to be reflection." He tried to speak, but she raised a hand. "Don't just listen." She walked around her desk, standing beside him instead of across from him. "Do you know what I saw when I watched that video, Lieutenant?" He didn't answer. "I saw a soldier who needed an audience to feel strong. I saw a man who mocked someone he didn't understand, because silence makes people like you uncomfortable." She paused. "You thought Captain Chun was nobody, but you never asked yourself why that mattered." Her voice softened slightly. "Do you know what she did after she left the range?" He looked up, confused. "She didn't file a complaint. She didn't call for punishment. She just wrote her report. Clinical, factual, damning. She didn't mention you by name more than once. She just described what she saw, and that was enough to burn your entire unit to ash." Hayes swallowed hard. "She didn't destroy you, Lieutenant," Morrison said. "You did." Across base, in a secure building with no name on the door, Captain Sarah Chun sat before her own screen. Her face was calm, but her eyes were tired. The secure link flashed. "Incoming Colonel Morrison." Chun accepted the call. Morrison's face appeared, drawn, professional but human. "Captain, thank you for taking this call," Morrison began. "I want to update you on actions taken." Chun nodded silently, letting her speak. "Lieutenant Hayes has been relieved of duty. Formal reprimand. Promotion freeze. Administrative reassignment. His team received written counseling and training orders. We've initiated a full cultural review of all instructor personnel. Every complaint from the past 3 years is being re-examined." Chun absorbed the information without reaction. "That's a good start," she said quietly. Morrison leaned forward. "Captain, I want to apologize. What you experienced wasn't just unprofessional, it was a command failure. I own that." For the first time, Chun's expression shifted, the faintest ghost of surprise. "Colonel, you don't owe me that, but I appreciate it." "It's not about you personally," Morrison said. "It's about every soldier watching that video who will learn what we tolerated." Chun hesitated, then spoke. "The lieutenant wasn't unique. I've seen his type before. You fix one, 3 more show up, because they're taught that power looks like control, not respect." "Then we'll teach them otherwise," Morrison said. Chun nodded once. "You'll need to start with how complaints are handled. The women who filed before me, they knew nothing would change. That's why they stopped reporting." Morrison scribbled something in her notes. "Names." Chun hesitated. 3 came forward after the range incident. Sergeant Maya Rodriguez, Specialist Jennifer Wu, Corporal Amanda Foster. "They trusted me. Make sure they can trust you." "I will," Morrison promised. "Then we have a chance," Chun said softly. That night, the colonel couldn't stop replaying one sentence from their conversation. "They trusted me. Make sure they can trust you." It haunted her more than any reprimand or headline ever could. She stood at her office window long after midnight, watching the training fields under pale floodlights. Soldiers ran drills in silence, their shadows crossing the ground like ghosts. This place was built to break the weak and shape the strong. But somewhere along the way, they'd forgotten that strength wasn't cruelty. It was integrity. It was how you treated the ones who couldn't fight back. She thought of Chun, calm, quiet, surgical in her composure. That kind of dignity didn't demand recognition. It didn't need medals or apologies. It just left its mark and expected the world to catch up. Wardell's earlier words echoed in her head. JSOC isn't treating this as a personnel issue. They're calling it a cultural failure. He was right. This wasn't one soldier's arrogance. It was an infection of values, and she was now the surgeon expected to cut it out without killing the patient. She turned back to her desk, the words forming themselves in her report before she even realized she was writing. Reform must be structural, not cosmetic. Accountability without humiliation. Education without tolerance for prejudice. The goal is not punishment, it's prevention. She read the line twice, then whispered it aloud. Not punishment, prevention. And for the first time in a long military career, she realized this wasn't about saving reputations. It was about saving the uniform from itself. Meanwhile, miles away in a quiet motel off the interstate, Captain Chun sat cross-legged on a bed, laptop balanced on her knees. Her report draft glowed on the screen, 47 pages of analysis, observation, and reform recommendations. She wasn't angry anymore, not in the way people imagined. Her anger had cooled into focus, the same steady calm she'd shown at the range. She wrote without hesitation. This incident is not isolated. It represents a systemic pattern of dismissive treatment toward women in training and evaluation settings. The underlying cause is cultural inertia, the normalization of arrogance, disguised as confidence. She paused, then added, cultural reform requires time, leadership, and example. One day of humiliation cannot change years of conditioning, but it can start the conversation. She stopped typing and leaned back, listening to the hum of the old motel air conditioner. Outside, trucks rumbled down the dark highway, carrying other people's missions, other people's noise. Her own mission was quieter, harder. In her world, victories weren't explosions or body counts. They were quiet corrections in places no one celebrated. She thought of Webb, the only one who had understood even a little. She'd seen it in his eyes that day. Recognition, guilt, a willingness to do better that mattered more than punishment. If even one soldier like him learned from this, then maybe all that silence on the range had been worth it. She saved the document, encrypted it, and sent it through JSOC channels. The confirmation icon blinked, transmission complete. She closed the laptop and whispered to the empty room. Sometimes, it takes one shot to expose 1,000 blind spots. Then she turned off the light. By morning, her report had already reached the Pentagon. And before the week ended, it would set off the kind of ripple that changes not just careers, but cultures. But she didn't think about that yet. She just thought about the sound of the range, the laughter, the silence after. Because that silence, the one she created, was louder than any gunfire she'd ever heard. The silence had changed everything. 2 weeks had passed since the range incident, but the echoes of that single morning still haunted every hallway, briefing room, and mess table at Fort Bragg. The base was quieter now, not in discipline, in discomfort. Everyone knew, everyone had seen the video. But no one wanted to admit what it revealed. Lieutenant Hayes had been reassigned to administrative duties, data entry, in an isolated logistics office. It was a career purgatory, the kind of punishment that didn't end with a bang, but a slow erasure. His name was still spoken, but only in whispers. The guy who mocked Artemis 6. The man who became the lesson. But for every soldier avoiding his gaze, there was another asking quiet questions. Who was she really? What else had she done? Why didn't she retaliate? The mystery grew because Sarah Chun wasn't there to explain it. She vanished again, back into the shadows where JSOC operators lived between missions, somewhere between myth and silence. Colonel Patricia Morrison stood at the head of a long, cold conference table, facing a half-dozen officers, each one older, louder, more skeptical than the last. They weren't here to help, they were here to contain. "Colonel," one major said, sliding a report toward her, "we reviewed your reform proposal. Mandatory inclusion training, external oversight, and a mentorship pipeline for female personnel. It's ambitious." "That's the point," Morrison replied. Another officer leaned back, arms crossed. "The problem isn't the system, it's individuals. Hayes embarrassed us, sure, but you can't punish the entire base for one idiot's ego." "It's not punishment," Morrison said evenly. "It's prevention." The general at the end of the table, Wardell himself, sat quietly watching. He'd given her latitude, but this was a test of conviction, not compliance. The major spoke again. "You're overcorrecting, Colonel. Soldiers need to toughen up, not get sensitivity briefings every quarter. You start making this about feelings, we lose focus on mission." Morrison's patience thinned, but she didn't raise her voice. "The mission," she said slowly, "is integrity. You don't defend a country by disrespecting the people who serve it." Her tone was calm, but it carried the edge of command. Wardell finally spoke. "Enough. We're not debating semantics. We're debating survival, institutional survival." The room stilled. He turned toward Morrison. "Colonel, you've identified a cultural failure. Fine, fix it. But fix it without breaking the base in half." Morrison nodded, but her eyes were sharper than her tone. "Sir, with respect, the base was already fractured. I'm just mapping the cracks." Wardell studied her for a long moment, then stood. "Proceed. But know this, if this reform makes enemies, they'll come for you first." She met his gaze. "They already have." Outside, the wind cut across the parade ground. The flag snapped hard against the pole, the sound echoing through open air. Webb stood watching from the sidelines, clipboard under his arm, his jaw clenched. He'd been given a new role, senior instructor, marksmanship reform lead. To some it was a promotion. To him it was a sentence. The first week, half his recruits didn't show up. The ones who did treated him like an outsider. Rumors traveled fast, the sergeant who sided with her. He could live with that. What he couldn't live with was silence from her. He'd sent a short message through internal JSOC comms. "Respectfully, ma'am, the range hasn't been the same since you left. Your words stuck. Trying to rebuild something better here. Would appreciate guidance." He never got a reply. Until the morning he did. The message came unmarked, encrypted with no signature, just 5 words. "Integrity has no audience, Sergeant." He stared at the screen for nearly a minute before realizing he was smiling. That was her. The tone, the simplicity, the quiet lesson disguised as command. He folded the message into his pocket as though it were sacred. By the 3rd week, the reform initiative had a name: Silent Sight. Morrison hated that she didn't come up with it, Wardell did, but the symbolism was perfect. A training movement built on what Chun had shown them. Awareness without arrogance, confidence without cruelty. Webb's team was small, 7 instructors, 2 analysts, and 1 counselor from behavioral services. Their mission: rebuild the culture of the marksmanship division. It started awkwardly. The first session was tense, 20 recruits sitting in silence while Webb spoke. He didn't lecture, he didn't scold, he told a story. "2 months ago," he began, "a soldier came to this range. No rank showing, no orders explained. Everyone assumed she didn't belong. By the end of the day, we learned who actually didn't." He paused, scanning their faces. That soldier wasn't loud. She didn't need to be, because strength doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it just acts and lets everyone else hear the silence after. The recruits sat still, listening. No laughter, no deflection, just the slow, uncomfortable realization that he was talking about them, not her. He ended the briefing with one rule: "You want to wear this patch. You learn to shoot with precision and speak with discipline. Both kill from distance. One kills bodies, the other kills trust. He walked out to the sound of silence, the same silence she'd left behind. And maybe, for the first time, that silence didn't feel empty. Meanwhile, in a glass office miles away in D.C., Morrison faced her own battle, a different kind of enemy. She'd been summoned to a Pentagon review board. The tone of the email had been polite. The subtext was, they wanted accountability, translation, a scapegoat. The room was cold. The men around the table wore ribbons like shields. Colonel Morrison, the chairman began, you've initiated sweeping reforms at Fort Bragg following the incident involving Captain Chun. However, there are concerns about morale and readiness impact. Can you justify these decisions? Yes, sir, she said simply. Concerns have been raised, another added, that you're prioritizing perception over performance, public image over combat efficiency. Morrison's voice stayed even. With respect, sir, combat efficiency means nothing without respect among the ranks. You can't build unit trust on humiliation. The chairman's pen clicked. Colonel, are you implying systemic sexism within the training command? She met his eyes. I'm stating it outright, sir. The silence that followed was ice cold. She continued anyway. Captain Chun's report identified structural blind spots. I've confirmed them. I'm correcting them. If that offends anyone, they're welcome to challenge my data, not my integrity. Wardell, sitting quietly at the back, couldn't help the faintest smile. When the session ended, the board had no further questions. Morrison walked out without waiting for dismissal. Wardell caught up to her in the hallway. You just told 3 generals they're part of the problem. She smiled faintly. They heard me. Yeah, he said, and they'll remember it. I hope they do, she said. Memory is the first step toward change. That night, Webb stood again at lane 3, the lane she'd used. The air was colder now. The range lights buzzed softly overhead. He set his rifle down, not to shoot but to think. He remembered her breathing, her composure, the way her silence had cut through noise. He thought of how easily Hayes had fallen, not from a bullet, but from truth. He whispered, "Ma'am, wherever you are, they're still hearing you." A gust of wind passed through, stirring dust across the concrete. For a second, it almost sounded like an answer. In another part of the world, a barren training ground in Nevada, Sarah Chun lay prone in the desert dirt, rifle steady, eyes fixed on a moving drone target. JSOC had reassigned her quietly. No interviews, no mentions, no press leaks. Operators like her didn't exist on paper, but her actions had made their way into whispers and whispers into myth. The sun scorched the sand, the mirage heat blurring the horizon. Through her scope, the world narrowed again, one target, one breath, one heartbeat. She exhaled, fired. The drone disintegrated mid-flight. The observer beside her, a young sniper in training, lowered his binoculars, stunned. "Ma'am, that was a mile out." Chun didn't respond immediately. She just adjusted the scope, checked her data pad, then finally said, "Range doesn't matter if your principles are off." The trainee frowned, confused. She smiled faintly. "You'll understand one day." He nodded, unsure, and returned to his own rifle. When she stood to leave, the horizon ahead shimmered, endless, hot, silent. She whispered almost to herself, "Every shot echoes somewhere, even the ones people pretend not to hear." Her radio crackled faintly. "Artemis 6, report complete. Next assignment pending." She clicked the transmitter once, acknowledgement. Then she shouldered her rifle and walked toward the rising heat, vanishing again into the mirage, part legend, part ghost, entirely herself. Back at Fort Bragg, Webb pinned a new quote above the range safety board. No author, just the words. Integrity has no audience. No one said it aloud, but everyone who saw it knew where it came from. And for the first time since the incident, There was pride on that range again, quiet, humble, earned. Not from perfection, from reflection. Because somewhere out there, the woman who'd exposed their arrogance with calm precision was still watching, not through scopes or commands, but through the ripple she'd left in them. And though none of them would admit it aloud, every man who stepped onto that firing line carried her silence with him. It had become part of the range itself, an invisible standard higher than any regulation. Sometimes the real change doesn't begin with a speech. It begins with discomfort, with shame, with the moment a proud man realizes the quiet one was right. And sometimes, the most dangerous sniper isn't hunting people. She's hunting mindsets. They called her back without warning. No preamble, no debrief, just a message that appeared on her encrypted channel at 200 hours. Operation, Night Glass Activation Code A622. That was all she needed to know. By sunrise, Captain Sarah Chun was already in transit. Nevada to Andrews, Andrews to Ramstein, then forward deployment to an undisclosed region. No one said where, they never did. She didn't ask either. When you'd been doing this long enough, you learned that details came late. The silence before was where clarity lived. The small transport jet cut across gray dawn, its hum steady, its cargo, 6 soldiers and 1 woman with eyes that seemed to calculate everything and react to nothing. The young operator seated across from her tried not to stare, but couldn't help it. He'd heard the stories everyone had. He leaned forward cautiously. "Ma'am, is it true what they say about the Fort Bragg incident?" She looked up from her gear bag, expression unreadable. "Which version?" He froze. That you." "Stopped a class from embarrassing itself," she interrupted dry. He smiled awkwardly. "Yes, ma'am, that one." She didn't respond, just went back to checking her rifle. The M2010 ESR, her preferred long-range partner. She stripped it, inspected every spring, every joint, every breath between steel and skin. Silence filled the cabin again. To the new generation of operators, she was legend and myth rolled into one. They called her Artemis because she hunted in the dark and because she didn't miss. But the legend left out the weight. Every legend does. The mission briefing came mid-flight. A projection flickered across the dark cabin, grainy satellite images of a mountainous region. The mission officer, a grizzled intelligence analyst named Brooks, spoke without preamble. 2 days ago, a JSOC reconnaissance team, call sign Ghost Actual, went dark in the core plateau region. No comms, no beacons. Last transmission indicates ambush. We believe they were targeted by an unidentified cell operating under former military protocol. "Former military?" Chun asked, tone quiet but focused. Brooks nodded grimly. "Ex-US Special Operations, rogue assets, hired by unknown private entity. Intel believes they're operating under a single commander, code name Midas." "Midas," Chun repeated. "Why him?" "Because he makes everything he touches go dark," Brooks said. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the satellite overlay. "How many?" 6-man kill team, precision-trained, equal or better than your average Tier 1 unit." Her voice was calm, equal or better. Brooks didn't answer directly. "We're not deploying you to fight them head-on. Your task is recon, locate, confirm Ghost Actual status, identify targets, exfil clean. Lethal engagement only if compromised." Her silence stretched long enough to make him uneasy. Finally she said, "Who's on support?" "Tech and drone surveillance from Al Dafra Base. Remote link only, no ground backup." She gave a small, humorless smile. "So, alone?" "Essentially." Brooks hesitated, then added, "Command wanted someone who could operate independently. Someone who doesn't rattle." Her fingers brushed the rifle beside her. "I don't rattle," she said quietly. Night came quickly over the core plateau, the kind of blackness that eats light whole. The terrain was brutal. Jagged rock, shifting wind, dry ravines that whispered when you breathed wrong. She moved like a shadow, rifle cradled against her chest, boots making no sound on stone. Every step was deliberate, every breath timed. Her comm hissed quietly. Artemis 6, this is Overwatch. Confirm uplink. Uplink confirmed, she whispered. Thermal grid online. We've got faint movement northeast ridge, grid 29 Alpha. Could be hostiles. She adjusted her position, crawling along a ridgeline that overlooked a ravine. Through her NVG lens, she saw it faint heat signatures, 6 in total, moving in staggered formation. The spacing was textbook, too precise to be locals. Her voice was a whisper, they move like us. Copy, Overwatch replied. No sign of ghost actual. She panned her scope further down the ravine, then froze. 6 heat sources, but 7 shadows. Her pulse slowed. The 7th wasn't moving. Found one, she whispered. The figure was slumped against rock, half covered by dust and time. The insignia on the vest still glowed faintly under her IR. Ghost actual. She exhaled slowly. 1 KIA confirmed. The comm stayed silent for a moment. Then, understood, proceed with caution. Hours passed, the night deepened, the wind grew cruel. Chun moved through the rocks with the silence of someone who'd lived too long among ghosts. By 300, she had visual confirmation on the rogue team's camp. They dug in firelight low, positions tight, security perfect. Whoever they were, they'd been trained by the same doctrines she'd once lived by. She set her rifle, calibrated the range. 850 meters, clean line of sight, 6 visible, 1/10 the commander. She didn't take the shot. Not yet. Her mission wasn't elimination, it was understanding. Why were they here? Why target JSOC? Something about it didn't fit. Rogue teams didn't just appear out of nowhere with this level of discipline. Someone was pulling strings. She keyed her mic. Overwatch, request intel crosscheck on codename Midas. I need history, service record, discharge details. There was a pause, then static. Copy that, stand by. The night pressed heavier around her. She waited, minutes stretched into hours, then a faint crackle returned. Artemis, we found him. Midas' real name, Captain Owen Cray, former Delta, discharged 5 years ago. Psychological failure, court-martial sealed. She frowned. What kind of failure? Static swallowed most of the reply, but one phrase came through clear. Incident at Helmand, snipers compromised. Her blood went cold. Helmand. She'd been there. Her hands tightened around the rifle. She remembered the night, the dust storm, the callouts, the ambush that killed 3 men from her platoon, the one she'd been blamed for until the investigation proved she'd saved everyone else. Owen Cray had been on that mission, and he hadn't forgiven her. The realization settled like frost. This wasn't a mission, it was a message. Midas wasn't just killing JSOC teams for hire, he was hunting the ghosts of his own past, and she was the one name that hadn't been crossed off his list. Her whisper was barely audible. He's not hunting them, he's hunting me. For the first time in years, her heart skipped. Not fear, awareness. The kind that comes when the hunter realizes she's become the prey. She adjusted her scope again, scanning the camp. There near the fire, Cray himself, older but unmistakable. He wore the same habit, finger tapping the rifle stock, rhythmic, compulsive. Memories flickered. The yelling during that Helmand firefight, the accusation that she'd misread coordinates, the months of silence after. He'd blamed her for everything that broke him. Now he'd built a kill team from men who felt betrayed, forgotten, or used. Soldiers left behind by the same system she'd just tried to reform. The irony wasn't lost on her. Overwatch, she whispered. This is Artemis. Target command confirmed. Cray Owen, I have visual. Copy Artemis, standing by for your call. She exhaled, long and quiet. Her finger hovered above the trigger, then stopped. Killing him would end a man, not a mindset. She needed proof, evidence. The truth about who'd hired him, who'd funded him, who decided that ghosts like him could still serve a purpose. By dawn, she'd repositioned twice. Cray's camp had gone cold but not deserted. They were moving again, organized, purposeful, headed north. Her drone feed flickered as she moved through the valley below, staying low, invisible. The terrain twisted like a labyrinth, narrow paths, high walls, dead air. Then a sound. Too close, too deliberate. She froze. A voice behind her, quiet, familiar. Always 2 steps ahead, weren't you? She turned slowly. Owen Cray stood 10 meters away, rifle lowered, eyes locked on hers. He looked older, harder, but the same anger simmered under the surface. Artemis, he said, almost smiling, didn't think they'd send you. They didn't, she said. They sent a ghost. He chuckled darkly, still dramatic. You always thought war had poetry in it. I used to admire that. Her hand stayed near her sidearm, but she didn't raise it. Why, Cray? Why kill your own? He tilted his head. You still don't get it. They made us disposable. We bled for their medals. Now I'm just balancing the equation. They didn't make you pull the trigger on your own brothers. No, he said softly, but they made me want to. The silence that followed was heavier than the mountain air. She saw it then, the madness mixed with conviction. He wasn't just broken, he was certain. I'm not here for you, he said finally. You're just the punctuation mark. He raised his rifle. But she'd already moved. One breath, one step to the left. The shot cracked, echoing off rock. She rolled behind cover, dirt spraying. Her own shot followed, precise, reflexive, intended to disarm. His rifle clattered away. She moved fast, closing distance. The two collided, not soldiers, but ghosts of the same war, fighting over the meaning of what it had cost them. Cray slammed her against stone. You left me there, he snarled. You left all of us. She gritted her teeth. I pulled you out of that fire. You chose to burn after. He hesitated, a flicker of old memory, then lunged again. She countered, swept his legs, pinned him. Her knee pressed against his shoulder blade, her sidearm leveled at his head. Stop, she said quietly. This isn't who you were. He spat blood, laughing. You still think there's a who left. She hesitated. That 1 second of empathy, enough for him to twist, break free, vanish into the rocks. She didn't follow. She just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the space where he'd been. The hunt had begun, and for the first time, she wasn't sure who was hunting who. She keyed her calm. Overwatch, target Cray alive. He knows I'm here, he's moving west. This isn't about ghost actual, it's personal. Static then, copy, Artemis exfil denied. Command orders mission continuation. You are now primary pursuit. She exhaled slowly. Alone again, no backup, no margin. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, a man who once fought beside her was now building a war designed for her. The desert wind carried the first rays of dawn over the plateau, cutting across her face as she looked west. The mission had changed, the lines had blurred. But the principle hadn't. She chambered around, whispered to herself. Sometimes, the only way to stop a hunter is to remind him what mercy looks like. Then she moved into the shadows, where legends lived and monsters waited, silent, patient, ready. Because this time, the ghosts weren't just memories. They were moving. And in that still, breathless dawn, the war began again, one sniper against 6 men who'd once called her sister. The desert changes after sunset. The heat dies first, then the sound, then the color until everything becomes a palette of gray and motionless black. That was the kind of night Sarah Chun, Artemis 6, lived for. The kind of night where sight lied and silence told the truth. She crouched behind a jagged ridge, eyes on the ravine below. Through her thermal scope, 6 heat signatures glowed faintly against the cold stone. Cray's men spreading out, moving with precision, working a coordinated sweep. They were hunting her. Each man took a different sector, sweeping the plateau like clockwork. Efficient, controlled, trained. Just like she'd trained them. She didn't need confirmation. The patterns gave them away. Tight dispersion, minimal chatter, no wasted motion. These weren't random mercenaries. They were soldiers, former operators turned predators. Her own reflection. The irony twisted somewhere deep inside her. Overwatch crackled faintly in her ear. Artemis, status update. You've gone silent for 30 minutes. She whispered back, voice almost inaudible. Still here. They're close. They're using military clearance formation Delta 4. Static then, that's JSOC doctrine. Exactly. The radio fell quiet again. She watched them move, patient, methodical. They weren't rushing. They knew she was out there, and that meant they were afraid. Only fools rushed a sniper they didn't understand. She smirked faintly. You learned something from me after all, Cray. A single shot shattered the stillness. A clean, distant crack that rolled across the plateau like thunder. She froze. That shot hadn't come from her or even near her. It had come from above. She shifted position, angled her scope toward the source. The far ridge, 2 kilometers out, muzzle flash fatting. Her chest tightened. He wasn't just sending his men after her. He was testing her, mapping her response. Cray always did prefer the mind games first. She inhaled slowly, shifted left, and crawled up a ridge that gave her a partial elevation advantage. The rocks scraped her forearm, slicing skin, but she ignored the sting. Through her scope, she scanned each moving figure. 5 now. One was down, not from her but from him. She whispered to herself, "You're cleaning your own board, aren't you, Owen?" She saw it happen again, another faint flash, another silent collapse. Cray wasn't just hunting her. He was pruning his team. Cutting the weak. Overwatch broke through again. Artemis, satellite confirms multiple gunfire points. You're being flanked. Extraction window closing in 20 mics. She ignored the extraction call. Her mind was already piecing it together. Cray's men weren't his allies. They were bait. And she'd been drawn right into the center of it. Overwatch, she said quietly. Do not exfil, not yet. Artemis, that's a direct order. She cut the channel. The decision was made. She wouldn't leave until she understood why. She moved downslope through the wind-cut shadows, using the rocks as cover. Each footstep was an equation: balance, sound, rhythm. Every 100 meters she stopped, listened, waited. The desert has its own pulse, she thought, and tonight it was too still. Then she saw it, a figure ahead, kneeling, scanning the horizon, the faint hum of a comm device at his collar. She raised her rifle, centered his chest, exhaled once. And paused. No insignia, no unit patch, but his weapon, an old JSOC-issued MK-13, same as hers. Who are you working for? She whispered, though he couldn't hear her. A faint crackle in her comm answered instead, his voice calm and mocking. Still ask questions before you shoot, huh, Artemis? Her eyes widened. The voice wasn't coming from the man in her scope, it was coming from behind her. She rolled fast, dirt exploding beside her as a round hit where her head had been. Her rifle came up, reflex, instinct, but the shot never came. Cray stepped into view, 10 meters away, holding his weapon low, smile faintly visible even through the darkness. Predictable, he said softly. She kept her aim steady. So are you. They circled each other slowly, 2 wolves in the dark, their breath mixing with the wind. Do you even know what this place is? Cray asked. She didn't answer. He nodded toward the rocks. This plateau, it's where our team got stranded. You remember Helmand. Same coordinates, same wind pattern, same damn moonlight. I picked this place for that reason. He smiled bitterly. I wanted you to feel it again. You built an ambush out of nostalgia. Out of closure, he said. She shook her head. This isn't closure, Owen, it's decay. That made him laugh. You think you're still the righteous one, don't you? The savior. The one who doesn't break, but I saw you in Helmand. You were just as afraid as the rest of us. She didn't deny it. Yes, she said softly, but I didn't let it own me. The smile faded. You still don't get it, he said, stepping closer. You survived because you left me behind. I dragged you out. You dragged my body, not my soul. For a long, painful silence, neither moved. The desert wind howled between them like something ancient and alive. Then the sound of metal scraping stone. Another sniper, somewhere above, repositioning. Cray's head tilted slightly. You brought company. She shook her head. Did you? Before either could answer, the shot rang out. The bullet missed her by inches, hit Cray in the shoulder. He dropped, snarling, grabbing his arm. She dove for cover, scanning the cliffs. 2 flashes this time, opposite directions. It wasn't his men, it wasn't hers. It was someone else. Overwatch, this is Artemis. Confirm unidentified shooters. Who's on this frequency? No answer. Static. Then a faint voice. Not Overwatch, not Cray. Distorted, genderless, professional. Artemis 6. You were never authorized for this op. Stand down immediately. Her stomach turned cold. Who is this? This operation is terminated. Extraction inbound. Delete your data logs. Leave the area. She frowned. You're not JSOC. Negative, higher authority. The line went dead. Her eyes scanned the ridges again. Whoever these shooters were, they had thermal advantage, an authority high enough to jam JSOC comms. That changed everything. Cray was groaning, half-conscious, crawling toward his rifle. She moved quickly, pinned him again with her knee, tore the weapon from his grasp. Who hired you? She hissed. He looked up, laughing weakly through the blood. You still think this is about money? Then what? He smiled, about truth. And before she could press further, he leaned close, whispering, You're fighting the wrong ghost, Sarah. A single laser dot appeared on his forehead. Her instincts screamed. She dove aside, a shot cracked, spraying dust. When she looked back, Cray was still. One clean hole between his eyes. She stared for a long moment, not in shock but in recognition. A professional kill, silenced, clean, surgical. Someone wanted him gone, not captured. She keyed her comm. Overwatch confirmed sniper origin who just fired. No response, just static and the faint hum of rotor blades in the distance. Extraction. She ducked into the shadows as 2 helicopters swept over the plateau, floodlights tearing through the dark. Her radio flared again, a voice she didn't recognize. Artemis 6 mission concluded. You are to exfil immediately. Target neutralized. She didn't move. Her voice was low, steady. You silenced him, why? Because he knew what you weren't supposed to find out. She tightened her grip on the rifle, which is. That ghosts don't go rogue, Captain. They get reassigned. The choppers roared past, vanishing into the horizon. She stayed crouched, heart steady, mind racing. If what that voice said was true, Cray wasn't a traitor. He was cleanup. Someone had sent him to tie up loose ends and she just walked into the same trap. The desert was silent again. The wind carried dust across the blood-stained sand. Her rifle felt heavier now, not from weight, but from knowing what it might have been used to hide. She stared at Cray's body for a long time. The enemy who wasn't really an enemy. The man who died trying to tell her something no one wanted her to know. Her whisper barely reached the air. Who's hunting who now? She gathered her gear, her steps deliberate. Her mission wasn't over. Because she'd learned one truth that never changed in war: silence is never empty. It's full of secrets. And tonight, she just stepped into one of them. Hours later, she sat in the cargo bay of an unmarked helicopter heading east. Her calm was dead, her orders sealed. She stared out the open ramp at the fatting desert below, the first light of dawn rising. There was blood on her sleeve and dust in her hair, but her eyes, those steady, watchful eyes, were still calm. She whispered to herself, half a prayer, half a vow. Mercy doesn't mean weakness, and silence doesn't mean surrender. Then she looked toward the horizon, where the light met shadow, and added softly, "Sometimes dignity survives by disappearing." The wind roared louder, drowning her words, carrying them into the vast emptiness of dawn, where ghosts and legends shared the same sky. The helicopter landed without lights, without insignia, without words. When Sarah Chun stepped out, the air felt different, heavy, metallic, manufactured. The desert dust had been replaced by the sterile cold of steel. A facility stretched ahead, underground, built into the rock, invisible from above. The kind of place that didn't exist on maps. The kind of place she'd once been told was above her clearance. Now they'd brought her here. Two men in gray uniforms approached, neither wearing rank. Their movements were sharp, rehearsed. "Captain Chun," one said, voice flat, "this way." No explanation, no small talk, just corridors and keypads. She followed. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Her boots echoed against concrete until even the sound seemed swallowed by distance. At last they reached a sealed door marked only with a number, Sublevel 5. One of the men keyed in a code. The door opened with a hydraulic hiss. Inside waited a single figure, seated, calm, hands folded. Older, sharp, command presence without uniform. "Captain," the man said, his voice measured and disarming, "please sit." She didn't. "Who are you?" He smiled faintly. "Names are for paperwork. Let's just say I'm the one who makes sure certain truths stay buried deep enough to protect the surface." Her jaw tightened. "You killed Cray." "I ensured operational integrity," he said. "You call it killing, I call it maintenance." "Maintenance," she repeated. He leaned back, studying her. "Do you have any idea what Cray was about to expose?" "I know he was being hunted." "By choice," the man corrected. "He turned a simple contract into a crusade. He thought he'd found something dangerous enough to dismantle everything you serve." She folded her arms. "And what's that?" "Truth," he said simply. "The kind of truth soldiers don't survive knowing." The silence that followed felt surgical. He stood and walked to the glass wall behind him. On the other side, darkness. But as the lights adjusted, she saw them. Rows of servers, terminals, racks of encrypted hardware. "This is where we track every operation that doesn't officially exist," he said. "Every kill confirmed, every name erased, every mistake rewritten before it ever reaches the press or a courtroom." He turned to her. "Cray used to work for us, so did you in a way, you just didn't know it." Her throat tightened. "You're saying JSOC's reports are sanitized, adjusted for public morale?" She took a step closer. "Adjusted by who?" He smiled faintly. "By me, Captain." For a moment she couldn't move. Her mind replayed everything, the reports she'd filed, the investigations she'd trusted, the officers who'd sworn by integrity. "You erase the truth," she said quietly. He didn't deny it. "I curate it, I protect the mission. You think the country survives by confession. No, it survives by narrative." Cray didn't understand that. He thought exposure was purity. He was wrong. "And what about me?" "You're still useful," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "For what?" He gestured toward the far wall. The glass flickered and footage appeared. "Satellite view. The core plateau, her engagement, her shots, her confrontation with Cray. Every second had been recorded. How? Your optic, he said simply. We embedded a microtransceiver in the M2010 series years ago. Every field you streams data to a secured archive. Her voice went cold. So you were watching. Always. She stared at the footage, at herself moving like a ghost through the rocks, at Cray falling to the ground. You set us up. We tested you. Her hands curled into fists. You used me as bait. He didn't flinch. You were the only one who could bring him out. We needed confirmation he'd gone rogue. She shook her head slowly. He wasn't rogue, he was trying to warn me. The man sighed. Captain, you of all people should understand the cost of believing ghosts. She turned away, but his next words froze her. There are no heroes left, Sarah, just tools. The sooner you accept that, the easier this gets. That night they kept her under observation. No restraints, just surveillance that didn't bother to hide itself. Cameras in every corner. She sat on the narrow bunk, staring at the wall, her mind a slow storm. She thought about Cray, the madness in his eyes, the desperation in his voice when he said, "You're fighting the wrong ghosts." He'd been right. The enemy wasn't outside. It was inside the machine. At 300 she stood, pressed her hand against the glass window of her cell, and whispered to herself, "You forgot one thing about ghosts. You can't bury what doesn't die." By morning they released her. No explanations, no questions, just an escort to the surface and an envelope with new orders. The guard at the elevator handed it to her wordlessly. Inside was a single sheet. Assignment Artemis 6. Return to Fort Bragg. Assume advisory role under Colonel Morrison. Silent Site Initiative under review. Maintain discretion. She read it twice, then looked at the guard. That's it. He didn't answer. When the elevator doors closed behind her, she exhaled, slow, deliberate. The same calm breath before a trigger pull. They wanted her back at Bragg. Back where it all began. Which meant one of two things. They trusted her, or they wanted to keep her where they could see her. Either way, she'd play along. For now, Fort Bragg looked different when she returned. Quieter, older, like the base itself had aged since the last time she stood on its soil. Colonel Morrison met her at the gate personally. "Captain," she said, her tone somewhere between relief and concern, "you look like you've seen ghosts." Chun gave a faint smile. "You could say that." They walked in silence toward the operations building. The air smelled like rain and brass, the familiar scent of habit. When they entered Morrison's office, the colonel closed the door and handed her a tablet. "Before we begin, you should see this." Chun took it. The screen played security footage, not of her, but of Webb's training sessions. Silent Sight in full motion. Dozens of soldiers learning discipline, respect, precision. "They're changing," Morrison said quietly. "It's slow, but it's real." Chun nodded, watching Webb on screen, confident now, but calm, deliberate. The way he spoke reminded her of something. Of herself. Then Morrison said something that made her look up. "There's more. Someone been trying to shut this program down. Anonymous directives, budget holds, all classified." "From who?" "I don't know. But the language in those memos, it matches the tone of certain JSOC clearance files." Chun's jaw tightened. "They're pulling strings again." "I need to know what you know," Morrison said. Chun hesitated. Then she told her everything: Cray, the ambush, the underground facility, the man without a name. Morrison listened without interruption. When it was over, she leaned back slowly. "So they're killing their own to keep secrets alive," she said flatly. Chun nodded. "And they're using soldiers like us to do it." Morrison exhaled. "Then it's time we decide who we really serve." That night, Webb joined them. They met in the old range office, lights dimmed, windows covered, the same place where it had all begun months ago. Webb sat across from her, looking uneasy. "Ma'am, I never thought I'd say this, but I think you were right. We're being watched. Comms are tapped. Even our after-action reports are getting redacted before submission." Chun's voice was quiet. "Then we stop writing reports." Morrison glanced between them. "You're suggesting we go off-grid." "I'm suggesting," Chun said, "we start acting like the people they trained us to be, independent, resourceful, invisible." Webb frowned. "That's treason, ma'am." "No," she said softly, "that's preservation." The colonel nodded slowly. "All right, Captain, let's say we do this. What's the plan?" Chun opened a small case, sliding out a drive no larger than a coin. "This holds the video of Cray's execution," she said. "If they ever move against us, we release it not to the press, but to the people who actually protect this country." Morrison's eyes narrowed, whistleblowing. "Insurance," Chun said. "If they want silence, they'll have to earn it." For a long moment, the room was silent except for the hum of the old lights. Then Morrison reached across the table, took the drive, and placed it in her jacket. "Then we stay quiet," she said, "but not obedient." Outside, the rain began to fall, soft, persistent, cleansing. Chun stood at the window, watching the drops streak down the glass. The sound reminded her of rifle shells hitting concrete, one by one, precise, inevitable. Webb joined her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you ever wish you just stayed in the shadows?" She smiled faintly. "No, shadows don't bother me, but I've learned one thing." He waited. She turned her gaze toward the storm. "The longer you stay in the dark," she said softly, "the easier it is for monsters to look human." Webb said nothing. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, he understood what she'd become. Not a weapon, not a legend, but something far rarer. A conscience with a scope. As the night deepened, Chun walked the empty range once more. The target still stood. The lights buzzed faintly. The same spot where arrogance had once mocked her now felt sacred, almost holy. She set her hand on lane 3's railing and whispered, "You were right, Owen, truth does kill." She looked out into the darkness, the place where every bullet, every decision, every silence still echoed. "Question is," she murmured, "who survives it?" Then she turned away, calm, unhurried, her silhouette dissolving into shadow. Because some wars end with ceasefires. Others end when the last honest soldier walks away and takes the truth with her. The storm ended before sunrise. By the time the first light touched Fort Bragg, the world looked cleaner, though Sarah Chun knew better. Rain only washed what it could reach. Everything else stayed hidden beneath the surface. She stood on the parade ground in silence, watching soldiers jog in formation, boots splashing through puddles that reflected a bruised dawn. They ran, shouted cadence, laughed. The machine kept moving. But something had changed. Every salute that morning carried a little more humility. Every joke died quicker than it once would have. The silence she'd left months ago had never really faded. It had simply matured, turned from discomfort into conscience. Still, she knew peace never lasted. And sure enough, the next storm was already forming. This time, in the form of a sealed envelope that waited on Morrison's desk. Her name stamped in red. The colonel handed it to her without ceremony. "Orders from above. You're to report to D.C. for reassignment review." Chun didn't open it. Voluntary. Morrison's expression told her everything. Not exactly. Webb sat nearby, his uniform crisp but his eyes tired. "They're calling it strategic rotation, ma'am. That's usually code for containment." Chun gave a dry smile. "At least they're predictable." She looked at Morrison. "They're afraid of what we know." "They should be," Morrison said. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of unspoken truths filled the office like thick air before thunder. Finally, Chun opened the envelope, a single sheet. "Assignment canceled." Captain Sarah Chun, discharged honorable. Effective immediately. No explanation, no reason, just erasure, polite, surgical, absolute. Webb stood, they're cutting you out. Chun folded the paper once, tucked it in her jacket. No, she said softly, they're setting me free. That afternoon she walked the base one last time. Every corner carried memory, every wall an echo. The same recruits who once laughed at her now saluted as she passed. She returned each gesture quietly, knowing most of them didn't even recognize who she was. Legends rarely looked like legends up close. At lane 3 she stopped. The air smelled of rain and cordite. She rested her rifle case on the table and opened it, running a hand across the cold metal. The same rifle that had ended wars, ended egos, ended illusions. She thought of Cray, of his last words, his broken conviction. You're fighting the wrong ghosts. Maybe he was right. Maybe the ghosts weren't the fallen. Maybe they were the living, the ones still pretending not to see. She closed the case gently. Behind her, footsteps approached. It was Webb. He hesitated, then said, "They can take your uniform, ma'am, not your mark." She looked at him, smiling faintly. "Then make sure the mark means something." He nodded once. "You have my word." By evening she was gone. No farewell ceremony, no speech, just a quiet exit through the same gate she'd once entered under scrutiny. The guard at the post checked her ID, glanced at the discharge letter, and hesitated. "Captain, ma'am, thank you for your service." She gave him a small, tired smile. "Just do yours with respect, that's thanks enough." Then she walked out into the open road, the sky burning orange over the horizon, her silhouette thinning against the light until it was just a shadow moving toward freedom. Weeks passed. Fort Bragg moved on officially, but unofficially her name became a story, then a symbol, then a whisper told to new recruits on their first day. Remember Artemis 6. She didn't need a medal to prove aim, she used her silence. Webb ran the Silent Sight program full-time now. Morrison supported from command, though she'd learned how fragile her authority truly was. Both carried her influence like gravity, unseen but undeniable. Meanwhile, somewhere on the edge of Arizona, in a desert town no one ever noticed, Sarah Chun rented a small house facing an endless stretch of sand. Her days were quiet now, mornings spent running, afternoons spent fixing her gear, nights spent writing. She filled notebooks with details, not missions or kills but reflections. Notes on leadership, empathy, restraint. Observations about how arrogance breeds fragility, and how silence, when used right, could break a man louder than any bullet. She wrote for no one, but she knew someone someday would find the words and understand. One night, months later, a letter arrived. No name, no address, just a return stamp from North Carolina. She opened it carefully. Inside were 3 lines, handwritten in careful script. Silent Sight has spread to 3 bases now. They're calling it the Artemis Standard. Every range starts with one rule: respect the quiet. M.W. She read it twice, then smiled, small, real, unguarded. Maybe that was enough. But peace has a way of testing itself. The next day, she noticed the reflection in her window. A black SUV parked across the dirt road, engine idling, 2 men inside pretending not to watch her. She didn't panic, she didn't hide. She poured a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and raised it slightly in a mock salute. After 10 minutes, the SUV drove away. She whispered to herself, still watching, good. Because as long as they were watching, they weren't erasing. Later that evening, the desert wind returned, the kind that carried dust like old memories. She set her coffee down, walked outside, and stood facing the horizon. The stars were beginning to appear, one by one, small points of light refusing to be swallowed by the dark. She thought of Morrison, of Webb, of Cray, of every name lost to the silence that built the walls she'd once served behind. She whispered into the wind, "You can't clean a wound by hiding it." And somewhere, deep in the distance, thunder answered, not storm thunder, but the kind that sounded like artillery rolling far away. A reminder. That peace is never permanent. That truth never sleeps. Inside her house, her rifle hung on the wall above the desk, untouched but never forgotten. Beneath it, on a single page pinned to the corkboard, were 4 words in her own handwriting. Mercy is precision too. Days turned into weeks, then months. No orders came, no visits, no summons. Until one morning, a knock. She opened the door to find a young woman in uniform, nervous, determined. "Captain Chun." "Not anymore," Sarah said gently. The woman shook her head. "You always will be, ma'am. I'm Sergeant Rodriguez, silent sight instructor. Colonel Morrison said you'd probably say that." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And what did she tell you to tell me?" The young soldier smiled. "That we're still hunting ghosts, just different ones now." Sarah laughed quietly. "Good." She motioned for her to sit. "Coffee." They sat for hours, teacher and student, mentor and memory, talking about training, about ethics, about what happens when the mission ends but the conscience doesn't. By sunset, the sergeant stood to leave. "One last thing, ma'am," she said. "They say you walked away from everything. Why?" Sarah looked toward the dying sun, eyes soft. "Because sometimes," she said, "you have to step out of the machine to remember why you built it." When the door closed and the quiet returned, she stood for a long time, watching the horizon fade from gold to blue to black. The world would keep spinning, the system would keep hiding, and she would keep watching, not as Artemis 6, not as a ghost, but as the quiet truth no system could kill. She whispered one last thought, to no one in particular, maybe to Cray, maybe to herself. They thought silence was weakness. They never understood it was aim. The night swallowed the words. But somewhere, across training grounds and battlefields, in the hearts of those who'd heard her story, the echo lived on, a quiet doctrine, passed in whispers, carried by soldiers who finally learned that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it breathes, it endures, it simply acts.